Hello, Dr. Hurd and Mr. Hauser. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, hello, hello.
Oh,
We'll be getting started in just a few minutes here.
okay. Avery, I see on my icon, well, actually it's buffering now. It had the video camera um icon with an X through it as if
Right. The webinars don't typically allow for video or having your camera on. It's just
okay.
audio.
That's what I was. So you mean I got dressed up in a blazer for nothing?
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sure
Since you can hear
that's
me,
an
it
inconvenience.
is an incredibly pressed and beautiful blazer and all that for nothing.
I am so sorry. Well, I hope it helps at least with feeling prepared and ready for the presentation.
No
But I
problem.
apologize. Yeah, this
No
is
problem.
typically just audio. All right, and then we're just going to give it a few more minutes, and then we'll
And
get up
Avery,
and
just to
start.
let you know, I had two reach out to me. I guess they had my email address saying because of classes, they might have to cut out early. Um, but they wanted to participate in the first half. So, uh,
Okay,
uh,
very good.
so
Yeah,
just
no,
wanted to share that.
I had a few reach out as well saying that like they if they had class or had work and they weren't able to attend. But the webinar is being recorded. I'll be sure to mention at the beginning of the presentation
Great.
that they'll be able to access it at a later date.
Fantastic.
Alrighty then, so we'll just give it a couple more minutes and we'll get up and started. Alrighty then. Well, it's just after 9 a.m. Central Time, so I believe we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to SCO's September webinar on Mastering the Admissions Interview. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you all are staying safe and healthy. My name is Avery Cunningham. I am a Student Services and Admissions Officer here at SCO. I am one of the admissions team members who answers your admissions questions and participates in the admissions process. Before we get started, I ask that we all use proper Zoom etiquette by keeping microphones muted unless speaking, limiting background noise, and respecting all of this webinar's attendees and facilitators. We will have time for questions towards the end of the webinar, but in the meantime, if you do have any questions or concerns that need immediate attention, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen to communicate with us. Today, we'll be discussing the admissions interview, one of the key features of the admissions process here at SCO. You'll be hearing from Mr. Joe Hauser, who's our VP of Student Services. We'll be talking about interview essentials, the admissions process, how to prepare before the interview, and how you should prepare or conduct yourself during the interview. And then towards the end, we'll hear from Dr. Cynthia Hurd, a member of our faculty and a longtime interviewer as part of the admissions process, who will give some key takeaways from that perspective of the admissions committee. Let's see, this webinar is being recorded and will be free and available to view starting, if not tomorrow, then on Monday on our website. And again, if you do have any pressing questions, please use the chat feature at the bottom of our screen. Alrighty then, Mr. Hauser, if you'd like to introduce yourself, we'll go ahead and get started.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? Well, I'm Joe Hauser. I'm the Vice President for Student Services. And as Avery Cunningham referenced, we have a team for the admissions process, 5 of us in total. And then you'll hear a bit later, Dr. Hurd is one of our faculty interviewers. And during the presentation today, we'll kind of go through the process of preparing for the interview, but then ultimately leading up to the actual interview itself, which is a one-on-one interview with a faculty member. All right. So as far as interview essentials, it's kind of like, what are we looking for as an admissions team before we sit down to determine who is accepted and who may still have some things to cover. The big 3, as referenced by this slide, what is your experience? A lot of this starts with your optometry experience. Why have you chosen optometry? Are you making a wise and informed decision as far as, think of this, you're looking at a 40, 50 plus year career ahead of you. It's not just getting into optometry school, it's the starting point of your career. So we want to make sure you've done your homework as far as making sure you've shadowed and or worked with different optometrists. And I emphasize the word different, not just one optometrist, so that you can get an idea, or you have an idea of the options ahead of you within the field of optometry. Do you have the discipline to succeed? In the interview, this will probably come up a little bit later, it's a closed file interview, so Dr. Hurd and other interviewers will not know your GPA, but we may ask about like time management. What kind of loads, academic loads, how many hours are you taking? When you're not in school, what kind are you working or involved in other activities? To give us an idea of your balance, because when you shift to optometry school, 17, 18 hours is a very heavy load in undergrad, but in optometry school, you're taking 22, 23, 24 hours, and they're all science or lab intensive. So there's definitely a transition. So we like to see what kind of discipline you've demonstrated up to this point to lead to future success. And as far as your research and choosing optometry, we like to see if you have a good understanding of where the future may hold with optometry. Are you aware of your state and or other states' laws, what you can do or can't do as an optometrist in your state? And that's been evolving significantly over the last I'll say 5+ years, as far as states have added different components to their laws, i.e. an optometrist can do more now than maybe what optometry has been able to do in the last few years. So we like to assess how much do you know? Have you talked to your optometrist about the growth of the profession of the profession, also about healthcare in general, as far as um, uh, the prospects of co-management and insurance and billing and coding, and how do optometrists work with other healthcare providers? So these are all questions. The more exposure you've had to it, you make a better impression on the interview. Work and shadowing. Sometimes we'll get a question, which is more important? Is it better to shadow different doctors or work for an optometrist? And there's not really a correct answer. They both have great value. Obviously, well, I should say obviously, but when you work as let's say as an optometry tech or in an optometrist office, you typically get a little bit more involved in the day-to-day than you would if you were shadowing. But if you're shadowing versus working, it may be a little bit more easier to see multiple offices. Whereas if you're working in one office, it might be a little more difficult to jump around and see. I think having a little bit of both, maybe working a summer or maybe like a winter break or something along those lines to kind of get that aspect is great. But certainly shadowing different optometrists, generally speaking, a very casual rule of thumb, and with COVID, it's been more of a challenge, more so a year or two ago than today. We realized that a year or two ago is harder to get in and shadow directly with an optometrist due to the pandemic. But we like to see at least 40 hours of shadowing and hopefully at least 3 different offices to kind of give you that balance and diversity of the different practices. So it's be prepared to talk about your experiences either working or shadowing. The faculty member may ask, well, what did you like? Or are there things that you didn't like about the practice that you shadowed, or specifically your involvement with direct patient care, whether that be in the exam room or in the optical or whatever the optometrist has allowed you to assist with. That's a common question as far as what are the patient encounter aspects that you liked either with shadowing and or working in the field. We talked about the state laws about, do you have a basic understanding of the scope of the profession? Optometry is a legislated profession, so therefore what your state board or state government allows you to do or not to do is a part of the equation. So like, for example, certain surgical procedures can be now, laser in particular, can be done in a handful of states. Whether that's your state or a neighboring state is something, it's always good to know in advance. At SCO, we teach to the highest level. So therefore, you're going to get exposed and involved in all these aspects, no matter what state that you're from or planning to go back to. But we always like for students to be aware of, because this is where the profession is heading in the years to come. By the time you graduate a few years from now, I imagine the profession will look a little different than what it is at this very moment in time. But seeing what that trajectory is helpful for an interview. And then the specific interest areas, many times, especially if you yourself were influenced as a patient within optometry, you may or may not be aware of what's kind of called the subspecialty areas within the field. Dr. Hurd's interest is within low vision, which is typically the elderly. So you yourself may not be as familiar with that, certainly as a patient. But we like for our entering students to be aware of these specialty areas so that when you enter optometry school, your eyes are open, no pun intended, to learn more about whether it be ocular disease, whether it be vision therapy, pediatrics, advanced contact lens fittings, traumatic brain injury, all of these, dry eye. These are all facets that are within your scope of practice as a future optometrist. But we also want to make sure that you're aware of it as you enter optometry school. again, some questions that are very commonly asked, and it may be different with each interviewer, but typically will come up to some degree. And also remember, with it being a closed file interview, the questions that Dr. Hurd and others will be asking tend to be more open-ended questions. So you'll be talking about yourself. And I bring this to your attention so that during halfway through the interview, if you're talking more than the interviewer, that's natural. And don't feel like, wow, am I being conceited here, or am I being too commanding of the time? No, that's intentional, because we want to assess your own interpersonal skills by your communicating. But the questions they'll be asking sometimes will be like balance between life and school. I shared earlier, you're making the transition from undergrad, where you may be taking anywhere between 12 and 18 hours a semester, to 23 hours in optometry school. So you're illustrating what kind of life school balance you've had to date, gives the interviewer and the admissions team an idea of how you might handle that time management or life school balance when you're in school. What kind of high pressure situations have you dealt with? What kind of challenges or hurdles have you had? Those could be academic, it could be personal. With the pandemic recently and still ongoing, it could be the stressors, the emotional strain, psychological strain of what everyone went through for the last 2 years. So that's another area that what I like to ask with the high pressure situation, what was your biggest challenge and how did you overcome it? Is a question that I like to ask. So it's not just identifying what the situation was, but how, as an undergraduate student, did you handle that situation? What did you learn from it, so to speak? Examples of adaptability and dealing with change. One of the biggest differences in health professional school, especially if you're a biology chemistry major, a lot of memorization in undergrad, which is necessary and important. But you're going to be making the transition in optometry school, being a very clinical, critical thinking profession, that it's not just memorizing the knowledge, but then utilizing the knowledge. And that can be a transition for some. So some students are, hey, if you can just give me something to memorize, I can do it and spit it out on a test. That's a good attribute, but you also have to apply that information and that knowledge in a clinical sense. And that's especially in the labs in your first 2 years. So that is sometimes a transition or a change that I think our students do incredibly well on, but we like to see examples of how have you been able to adapt or deal with change in the past. And then ability and willing to sacrifice. It doesn't mean too penalizing or anything, but the SCO culture is one of service. Whether that be serving an underserved patient population, whether that be mission trips, whether that be giving back to those less fortunate. Optometry as a profession, and historically, I'm not saying that other health professions haven't done this, but I think optometry has been at the leading cusp of this. Has always been a profession that not only is serving the patients in a clinical setting, in a healthcare setting that way, but many optometrists have also been pillars and leaders in their community, whether it be community service or, again, community leaders. So we like to instill that into our students, that you may be called upon as a future healthcare provider and leader of your community, not just to do eye exams, but to also participate in your community and helping that way. So we like to ask some questions about that too. When we say, do you understand the commitment involved? Again, I'm going to reference back to the transition from taking maybe 12 to 18 hours in undergrad to taking 23 hours in professional school. I guess one of the best analogies I can share, it's like it's a optometry school will be your full-time job, then some. On average, you're going to be in class or lab between 8 o'clock and let's say 3, 4 o'clock, at least in your first 2 years, with the occasional break, an hour here or a couple hours there. But then on top of that time period, you're going to have a couple hours on average each day or night in studying and preparing for, whether it be this week we have our midterm exams for students or lab practicals in the future. So when we say the commitment involved, it is an adjustment with time. And most of our students understand that, but we just want to make 100% sure that our entering students realize that this is not undergrad extended. This is enhanced. And my mentor, Dr. Billy Cochran, used to say only about 1% of the population has a doctorate degree. And of course, you're pursuing the doctor of optometry. So if it were easy and anyone could do it, would it be as valuable? I say no. But with that sense, there is a commitment involved to your 4 years of your study to prepare you to become the best optometrist possible. Do you have realistic ideas, opinions? It's a very open-ended question, but like for example, if a student thinks, oh, I can work 1 day a week as an optometrist and make $1 million a year. Well, that's an unrealistic expectation within the field or just in general. So sometimes the questions that come up in the discussion with an interview can echo whether or not you or other applicants do have a realistic opinion regarding healthcare in the future of healthcare and or optometry. And again, having a working knowledge of healthcare systems is important because optometry, even though it is its own regulated and legislated profession, you are co-managing your patients with MDs, PAs, pharmacists. You're co-managing, like if you have a diabetic patient coming to you, well, obviously you're working with their family physician or GP or PA on helping keep their blood sugar levels managed properly, et cetera, et cetera. So having a good working knowledge of how optometry works with other healthcare providers is also a good thing to have exposure to before you enter optometry school. Okay, the admissions process. Step one, if you don't apply, it's impossible for us to review your file. So I imagine some on this call have already applied and others may be a little down the road, but OptomCast is the common application that all optometry schools require. So you submit your OptomCast application. It starts July 1 of each year for the ensuing year. So like if you're looking to enter in the fall of 2023, i.e. you're looking to apply this year, the OptomCast cycle opened July 1 and it closes for us on March 1. And then we do have an SCO supplemental application. And then you also submit your fees and supporting documents like your letters of recommendation, your transcripts, et cetera. So once we get, and I use the word verified, OptomCast will verify or validate that, yep, this student does have a 3.7 GPA from school X and their letters of recommendation check out. So they verify that on their end. Once we get that verification, we do an initial evaluation of your transcripts and overall application to see where things are. If you have any shortcomings or something to address, our admissions team, including Ms. Cunningham or Mike Robertson, our admissions director, Rebecca Smetana, our assistant director, may reach out to you, and whether it be suggesting getting more experience in the field or retaking the OAT, or hey, we're going to wait for your fall grades because maybe your GPA is a little bit below the mean average, but we see that you're taking a very robust fall term. So these are things that we can have communication with you. So we do that initial review. which leads to who do we might want to invite for an admissions interview. And we have started the interview process for the fall of 23 entering class. We started that a little over a month ago. But typically we make that review and selection. If you are invited for an interview, I guess you can consider that you made maybe that first cut of, we don't interview everyone. So we only interview those that we feel have a legitimate chance for admission. It's certainly no guarantee. Let me stress that just because you've been invited for an interview doesn't mean 100% that you're going to be accepted, but it certainly is a great starting point. But there again, if the admissions team feels like, hey, we're inviting you for an interview, but we also recommend maybe you get another shadowing experience, or we still may ask you to retake the OAT if your OAT is kind of borderline. So that communication will be ongoing along with the interview selection. Step 5 is the actual on-campus interview day. It's almost a full day. The interview itself will last about 45 minutes to an hour. But along the, since it is a closed file, you have an open file session with one of the admissions members, which includes Ms. Cunningham and others, to talk about your prerequisites, your GPA, your OAT, your letters of recommendation, strengths, weaknesses, things along those lines. You get a tour of campus given by a student. You'll have a financial aid and housing luncheon to learn a little bit more about where students live and the financial aid process. You'll get to sit in on a class. This year, primarily, it's our pharmacology class taught by Dr. Enzer, a second-year course, and you'll get a bus tour of the kind of I wouldn't say the immediate area, but the Midtown downtown area, which is about a 3 to 4 mile radius of the campus, to kind of get a feel of what not just the campus is like, but what the city is like as far as housing, attractions, et cetera, et cetera. So that is something that is something to consider too. And then after the interview day, we do meet as an admissions committee, typically within a week of the interview, and then get back with you to let you know where you stand. Okay, the cycle, which with a circle, kind of, I'll start with you're invited for the interview. Again, the blind interview, as we referenced, it's also one-on-one. It's not a panel format. So the interview with the faculty member, again, is about a 45-minute to an hour. I referenced earlier the counseling session. That's a shorter session to go over the open file, but at the same time is important to make sure you've gotten everything in or anything that we recommend. You have the financial aid and housing session, and then the final conclusion of the cycle is that the interviewer submits his or her recommendation about basically whether to accept or not accept based upon the interview, and then the admissions committee meets a few days later. Some things to think through. When you get your interview invitation, typically you'll get your invitation a few weeks before. You'll get to select which day. You'll get the invitation. Like, for example, if an invitation goes out right now, the options might be, we typically interview on Fridays only. It might be for Fridays in like mid to late October, or maybe even early November as options. So you just kind of look at your calendar to see which day may be best. But think through your travel itinerary. Don't book a flight too close to the conclusion of the day. The interview starts around 8:30 and will conclude around 3:30. So whether you're driving in or flying in, you may want to make sure that you plan out your full itinerary and allowing for travel time. But also, we certainly encourage spending some time in Memphis. You will get plenty of recommendations, both as far as where to stay, things to do. You'll hear from students during the interview about this is my favorite place to get something to eat or listen to music or special attractions, etc. We do point out on the invitation as far as suggestions on where to stay and also where not to stay. I'll be very direct. At most cities, airports are not the most attractive places. Who wants to live with a bunch of planes flying around them? We usually suggest not to stay close to the airport. It's certainly your prerogative, but we like to give you our recommendations on where to stay, where not to stay, some good options for that. If you're bringing guests for the interview, if you're a parent or a spouse, significant other, definitely let us know, because we do provide a meal. We want to make sure that we have enough for that. What to wear? Typically speaking, for our male students, wearing a blazer or coat and tie certainly is appropriate. It's not, I won't call it an absolute requirement, but if a male student shows up in a polo shirt and shorts, it's going to come across less professional than if they were wearing a coat and tie. And for the appropriate parallel for our female applicants, whether that is a business suit or an appropriate dress, or blouse and pants, that's also typically a good gesture. Just what you think you would wear to a normal interview, I think would be the best gauge on what to wear in the impression that you're making. But also showing up on time and things along those lines. But also, if anything pops up, like your flight, you're missing a connection or there's a flight delay or something like that, just communicate with us to keep us posted, and we can help you with making an adjustment to the interview day. We're adept at that. We've done that before. And then also be thinking on the interview, I think we do a pretty good job of predicting maybe 80–90% of the questions that you will have for the interview. But if there are questions that are specific for you or important to you, plan in advance about asking those questions. A common misperception on the interview itself, if you have Dr. Hurd or others, feel free to ask them questions. It's not one-sided only. You may ask Dr. Hurd, why do you like being a faculty member at SCO? What do you like about SCO? What do you like about living in Memphis? Or just things that you can ask not only your faculty interviewer, the admissions team, but also students. And you'll get plenty of opportunity to talk to students as well. So asking them an array of questions like where they live, what was the transition like moving to Memphis, how hard is optometry school, things like that are very, very commonly asked questions on the interview day. Definitely a lot of frequent questions, high yield questions, so you're prepared. Be prepared to talk about yourself. I know that may be a little uncomfortable for some because it feels like, hey, I'm dominating the conversation, but that's the only way for the interviewer to learn more about you. What led you to choose to become an optometrist? Again, not a right or wrong answer, but it helps the interviewer learn a little bit about why you've chosen the profession. Is optometry a good career match? What career alternatives, if you're applying to optometry school and you don't get in, what other options? Again, these are not right or wrong answers, or the answers aren't right or wrong, but what is your plan B if you don't get into optometry school or other careers that you have looked into? Just like, is there anything else that you'd like to add or share? Is there something unique about your background that's maybe a little atypical? And I'll give an example here. Several years ago, we had a student, his freshman year at Clemson, his brother passed away, and he probably should have withdrawn from school that year, but he had 30 hours of F on his transcript. It was dismissed from Clemson, but then took a semester off, returned, and came back and was basically a 4.0 student, and graduated in 3 years from that. But that year of F on his transcript certainly weighed heavily on his actual GPA calculation. We certainly took that into account, but on the interview day, he wanted to make sure that the admissions committee was aware of what happened personally during that time. He was his brother's caregiver, and certainly that was an understandable strain on him for that 1 year. And then again, asking questions of the interviewer as far as what do you like about SCO? What do you think what makes SCO stand out? What are your thoughts on the future of the profession, or how is SCO preparing you for the future of the profession? These are just questions that you can expect to be asked either yourself or that you could certainly ask the interviewer. Okay, and then just connecting with your interviewer, think about, put yourself in the shoes of the interviewer. If you were a faculty interviewer, how would you rate yourself, or what would you want the applicant to say to connect? So it's sort of like, what will make their job easier in filling out the evaluation? So if the interviewer is asking you questions and you're sort of short and succinct, or saying yes or no, or sometimes not answering the question, if you want to impress the interviewer, listen to the question and answer it to the best of your ability as far as addressing that specific question. So if the interviewer asks you about why optometry, and you start talking about a fall semester where you took organic chemistry and calculus and microbiology, and it was a tough semester, it's a poignant point, but it's not answering the question that was presented. Was the exchange pleasant? Was it energetic? Body language. You know, when you're sitting across the desk or the table from the interviewer, are you giving the interviewer an impression of apathy? If you're kind of slumped over in your chair, or not making good eye contact, you can wrongfully give the interviewer the impression of like, does this person really want to be here today? It seems like they kind of checked out, or whatnot. Now, being energetic or does
May have
not
lost you.
imply, I'm sorry? Being energetic does not
Hauser.
imply you have to be extroverted.
Alrighty, so what we may do while Mr. Hauser is getting back online, we may go ahead, Dr. Hurd, if you're here and ready, we may go ahead and start with your questions, if that's okay.
Sure. Excuse me. Sure, that's fine with me. First of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself.
Right.
Is Mr.
All
Hauser
right,
back?
so Dr. Cynthia Hurd, as mentioned earlier, is a member of our faculty and a longtime member of the admissions process here at SCO. Dr. Hurd, would you mind introducing yourself, maybe telling us a little bit about yourself before we start talking about the faculty interview?
Sure. Again, I'm Cynthia Hurd. I've been a faculty member at Southern College of Optometry for 15 years. And prior to that, I attended Ohio State University College of Optometry. I graduated in 1992. Then in 1992 to 93, I completed a residency in geriatric and vision rehabilitation at the Birmingham VA Medical Center, which was affiliated with UAB on that campus. From there, I went back to, and that was in Birmingham. So I went back to Ohio and I taught in the clinical program at Ohio State College for 14 years. And after that, I then, of course, decided to transfer or move on to another position at SCO. And like I said, I've been here for 15 years. So in all, I've been in practice for 30 years. In fact, this is my 30th reunion year, which I'm actually about to go back to Ohio State and celebrate. So that's a little bit about me.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Dr. Hurd. So starting off, what are the first impressions that you personally look for in an admissions interview?
First of all, I just basically look to see, body language. Like we say, body language is like 90% of communication. I just pay attention to that. I look to see if the individual is happy to be here. If they're nervous, I reassure them right away, because there are ways to tell that without the person actually saying, I'm really nervous. And I just reassure them that all we're doing is having a conversation, and they should feel free to tell me anything that they want me to know about them, because I remind them that this is a blind interview and that I don't really know anything about them except their name and the state that they may currently be living in.
All right, thank you. Let's see, how do you feel a student can stand out during the interview?
I feel that a student can stand out. That's a kind of interesting question, because I've had situations where individuals actually bring me their resume and they say, well, I'd like for you to have this for your future reference. So that's been kind of interesting. One thing that allows, and I'm not encouraging this, because as far as the interview process goes, we are really fact-finding. So it's important for us to ask those questions. But one thing that does is, if the individual wants me to see their credentials, yet not focus on it in the first part of the interview, then we can focus on things that actually kind of the meat of why they're interested in optometry, and what they have done to indicate that interest by the time they get to the interview process.
Thank you. And I believe I may have skipped over a question here, but how do you feel the fact that these are blind interviews impacts the experience overall? I know you mentioned this a little bit when talking about first impressions, but maybe if you could elaborate a little bit more.
Sure. The blind interview basically forces me to ask just general questions, just to find out about the individual's even like living circumstances today, because the state that might be listed on their form could be different from the one that they actually live in on a routine basis. So I try to find that out, as well as which school they're attending, if they are in school, what year they've graduated, or if they're planning to graduate soon. So it's real basic fact finding on the early end. And then we kind of slip into what got them interested in optometry, and just things like that typically would happen during an interview process.
Thank you. What do you feel are some of the most common errors that students make during an admissions interview?
I would probably say, for sure, one thing is not telling me enough, because when I ask an open-ended question, I really want you to just kind of walk through the process by which you discovered optometry. So I'll ask you, well, what got you interested in optometry? I don't care if it goes back to second grade. I want to know that, because that does kind of inform my thinking as we're kind of going through the interview process. I also want to know just general things, like I just mentioned already, like where you're from, where you went to college, or if you're going to college at the moment, what your major is, if you have a minor or a double major, which I just recently found out that that's a thing at some colleges. And so just kind of giving me a synopsis actually helps me quite a bit, because it helps me to check many boxes on that interview form. And I don't have to go back and ask you every single piece of information in regards to what made you, what got you interested, and things that you actually pursued and decided, I don't think that's for me. And then, you discover optometry. I think that's really important because we all need to go through that process so that we can figure out if optometry is for us, because I've also interviewed children of optometrists. And so they have to figure it out too, because they don't want to, think they don't want to grow up and think that, well, I'm going to do this because my mom did this or my dad did this. I think they have a harder time because they have to disprove everything else is for them. And then they come back to optometry. It's kind of an interesting thing.
Thank you. Excuse me. What is an example of the most impressive interview you've conducted, and vice versa, the most unimpressive?
So I would say an example of the most impressive interview I've conducted. It's really interesting. Periodically, I will interact with a candidate, and it's like we're simpatico almost right away. And I can't tell you how to do that because that's just something I think is organic. But we just talk about things, and we talk about, not only do we talk about optometry, but we talk about life things. And so those are things that are really interesting to me. So if we can get through that other stuff and get to some fundamental things like, what your philosophy on life is and how the things that you've been involved in, especially in the college or your adult life and college years, how that has actually informed your life philosophy, because some people are very generous with their time, or they're really interested in doing mentoring, and so they already do it. And then they tell me, about why mentoring is so important to them. So it's just something that shows some depth to the individual that I don't even necessarily have to ask for. That's something, because it's important for them to communicate that. They communicate it almost right away. And the most unimpressive interview I've ever had was actually, I can never forget this one, was with a young man who I think was just rather immature. But I think he had a parent that was an optometrist, and they really wanted him to get an interview, although he may not necessarily have been a good candidate even on paper. It was just one of those things where the school just said, okay, let's interview him and see how it goes. And he totally tanked on the interview. I don't know if he was just really nervous. In fact, he had forgotten that I was a faculty member and an optometrist. It was just really awkward. So there wasn't a whole lot I could do about that except, try and salvage what I could from the interaction and make sure that I, got the answers to the questions that I was looking for.
All right, thank you. And then I think our last question, what advice would you offer students who are anxious about the SCO admissions process?
I would say if you are following the process or the protocol that has been laid out, especially in this webinar, then there's really no reason to be anxious. Some people are just anxious by nature, and I understand that. But if you are doing your homework, following the process, especially in the timeline that it's being recommended for you, then you're not going to miss the boat on anything. Then you can actually spend your energy channeling it toward things that really need it, like your studies in school, or if you are preparing to take the OAT, preparing for that, making sure that the day that you take the test or the day before, you get plenty of rest the night before, drink plenty of water before you get there, but not right up to the test, because you may have to go to the restroom. So you know what I'm talking about. You just want to make sure that you're in tip-top mental and physical shape so that you can take that test and feel good about what you did.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Hurd. I believe we do have Mr. Hauser back. So at this time, especially while we have Mr. Hurd here, or excuse me, Dr. Hurd here, I think we'll open up to questions. And if we need to, we can go back to those last couple of slides, Mr. Hauser, that we had to step away from a little bit earlier. But for now, since we have Dr. Hurd, I think we'll go ahead and open up to questions from the group. So attendees, please feel free to use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. There's also a Q&A feature that works in the same vein as chat for any questions that you have for Mr. Hauser or Dr. Hurd about the interview process here at SCO. And then we're waiting for some questions to come in, but in the meantime, Mr. Hauser, since we lost you for a few minutes there, do you have any last commentary or additional recommendations to give to students while we wait for some questions?
Sure. Avery, can you hear me now?
Yes, I
Okay,
definitely
great,
can.
great. Apologize for the disconnection. Remember, just a piece of advice, you're looking at us just as much as we're looking at you on the interview day. As we talked about, come prepared. That's vital. If you want to make an impression on Dr. Hurd, don't forget that she is an OD and a faculty member. That would be kind of a bad first impression if you forgot that. I might be showing my age here, and it may be more of a generational thing. But when you're communicating with a faculty member, it's a delicate balance of it's a friendly day, but I don't want for you to take it too casually. I don't think Dr. Hurd would be offended if you called her Cynthia, but in my opinion, maybe this is how I was raised. You show the due respect of at least introducing her to yourself to her as Dr. Hurd, and sometimes you don't want the communication to be too casual, whether that be in an email or a text or in person. It doesn't have to be prim and proper or totally formal, but just so some of those aspects comes across very favorably. But as I was referencing earlier, you're looking at us just as much as we're looking at you. Think of it this way. If you apply to 3 or 4 optometry schools and you get into all 3 or 4, then what are you going to do? You can only pick one school. So the interview day, in my opinion, is a great opportunity to ask the questions that you need to discern, okay, if I get into all the schools I've applied to and it's a month or 2 from now and I have to make a decision, what information do I need to make an informed decision? So I think that's a great approach to take with the interview as well. You know, have humility, be humble, be respectful, but also think of it as, what do I need to learn so that if I get into SCO as well as other schools, what do I need to learn about SCO to make an informed decision?
Thank you. And then we do have a couple of questions that just came in. First one was for Dr. Hurd, I believe, from Corey. It says, Dr. Hurd, I was just wondering what inspired you to do your residency in low vision specifically. Thank you both for all of the helpful information this morning.
I forgot I was muted. Sorry about that small delay. I would say that the thing that really encouraged me to consider a residency in low vision and in geriatric care was the fact that there was an alumna who actually came back and talked to my class at the beginning of my 4th year in optometry school. So let me give you a few comments about that so that you kind of understand my perspective as I was looking at doing a residency overall. So this was 1992 in Columbus, Ohio. I was at Ohio State. I only had about 300 to 350 patient encounters during my whole time in optometry school. Our graduates have 2,600 patient encounters. So you can see that's a huge difference. But the time in which I graduated, that was 30 years ago. So it was a different time. But I felt woefully underprepared to take care of patients. I just didn't feel like if someone came in, unless it was something I had seen a number of times, that I would have been able to figure out how to assist them. And so that was something that I had to figure out, okay, I need to do something so that I can fill that gap. And I can feel so that I can feel comfortable. And that was part of the reason. The other thing was the alumna that actually came and talked to us was a low vision doctor. And she worked at a center in Columbus called the Center for Sight, I think it was called, the Columbus Center for Sight. And not only did she examine patients who had reduced vision or who were maybe even blind, she also worked with occupational therapists who actually were trained to work with people with low vision or blindness. So, and other individuals who were specialists as well, like orientation and mobility instructors, individuals who were who worked with individuals with adaptive technology. So, of course, computers and for sure cell phones were not ubiquitous at that time, just in general everyday life for people. But people who were blind were working with systems so that they could either learn Braille or so that they could use Braille to communicate with other people. And that was so fascinating to me that I thought, okay, this is a whole nother world. And it just really piqued my interest to the point where I applied to do a residency. And then when I went to Birmingham, because I'm originally from Jackson, Mississippi, going to Birmingham was almost like going home again, although it was 240 miles away from where I was. And but I got to spend more time with family during that year that I was there, because I had my weekends off, and I thoroughly used them. I traveled a lot that year, and then learning how to work with low vision patients and geriatric patients. But I also had a lot of veterans who were all ages. So anyone who actually walked into the optometry clinic. So I also got to do contact lens work, especially specialty contact lens fits and things like that. So I got to do quite a few things in my residency that really helped to increase my confidence level. And so I think I was comfortable going back and teaching because of my experience as a resident. And I had never taught any other individuals in a clinical setting, except informally. And so this was actually a natural thing for me. So thank you for that question.
Wonderful. And then we have a next question from Marshall. This for both Mr. Hauser and Dr. Hurd. Do you have any experience with non-traditional students at SCO? I am a former high school teacher making the transition into optometry.
Well, I will start with that. The answer to that is yes, and that includes teachers, accountants, engineers, a wide variety of backgrounds and occupations that maybe a few years into work, someone realizes that this is not for them. In fact, our director of academic support services, Dr. Carrie Leibowitz, was a non-traditional student at us. She was a teacher, elementary school teacher, and enjoyed it, but didn't feel it was the right fulfillment of her career. Went back and took the prerequisites for optometry school, applied to optometry school, and started, if I had to guess, maybe 7-8 years after the average age of an entering student. So yes, we do have experience. Maybe the sense of the question you might be asking is that if you're a non-traditional student, you're going back and taking courses, yes, we do look at the totality of your average GPA, but in that situation, we look at the courses you've taken more recently, especially the prerequisites, like how did you do in physics, biology, organic chemistry, microbiology currently versus maybe if you took a gen ed course 10 years ago. All are factored in, but we definitely weigh the more recent and especially science courses more heavily.
I would like to chime in on that as well. Over the years, because of the number of years I've been involved with optometry, I have met people from the spectrum too. And so it actually is I find it to be refreshing to have someone who who actually has some life experience and who actually went out and took care of themselves and had to take care of a family, for example, and themselves, and go to school and do everything else that people who adult these days do. So so I find talking to non-traditional students to be a really good thing, because they have something to offer, or we have some discussions that are a little different from the ones we have with individuals who come straight out of college and then come to optometry school.
Great, thank you. And then the last question I'm seeing is from Jamie. It says, good morning, faculty of SCO. I had a quick question about the interview questions. Is it important to know facts or data about SCO in the optometry field and as a school? Thank you again for taking time to talk with us today.
Well, I'll start with this, but I'm also interested in Dr. Hurd's input there. It's a delicate balance. On one hand, quoting statistics like SCO was founded in 1932 may not make you a more prepared candidate, but what it does illustrate is that you have done your homework in looking up about the college. How I would phrase it is, as you're doing your homework, why did you choose SCO? And some of that could be fact driven, but whether it be viewing and navigating our website or talking with ODs or our alumni, being prepared to share, those aspects can portray you as a more informed student. So whether it is the details of when we were founded or the fact that our eye center opened in 2002, those are nice tidbits. But I think what shows more depth in your overall research of optometry schools, certainly SCO included, would be being able to convey what is it about SCO that attracted you to apply, but also knowing about us. So I would just navigate our website and look at what the aspects of the college, our curriculum, our clinical experiences, but that can also include the opinions of OD's alumni, which fortunately over the years, our alumni have more often than not have conveyed very positive attributes of how prepared they were as they entered the field of optometry. But I would say those aspects be important, but it's never a bad idea to go and look at our website and familiarize yourself a little bit more with the college, so that, again, not only for the interview day, but ultimately for when it's time for you to make the decision, where am I going to optometry school, that you know enough about us that you're making an informed decision.
I definitely agree with Mr. Hauser. Looking at our website can be invaluable, because the admissions folks, as well as the communication department, they spend so much time and effort making sure that we're putting our best foot forward on our website. We also, as a college, and especially student affairs and admissions, pretty much are on many of the most well-known social media platforms. So I remember interviewing a young lady last year, or maybe the year before, who told me that she started to follow SCO admissions on Instagram. And she said, every day or whenever I check in there, I get to see what's going on at SCO that day. And I thought that was the coolest thing. And so several interviews later, I pretty much told every person that I interviewed next that they should look for us on social media and then just take a look at what we're doing periodically. And because of the way Instagram is set up, I mean, they just show you stuff, what people are constantly posting and things like that. So that is a great way to keep up with what's going on at SCO, or what people are doing or thinking in regards to some of the things, you know, that we might be dealing with as a college. And you don't have to spend a lot of time doing it. And you actually might find out little fun facts that you may happen to remember that you may want to talk to the faculty member about when you do your interview. It makes for a fun conversation.
All righty, so any additional questions from our participants? All right, that one. All righty then. Well, I know we're a little over our scheduled time. Mr. Hauser, would you like to go back and address some of the slides you missed, or we can move towards wrapping up?
I'm glad to, if that's the preference.
All right, let's see. All right, in the meantime, Dr. Hurd, you're welcome to sign off. Thank you so much for joining us, and your contact information is on the screen. So as Dr. Hurd steps away, I'm sure, would you be open to attendees reaching out to you if they had any questions?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what I'm here for.
All right, wonderful.
Thank you,
Thank you
Cynthia.
so much, Dr.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hurd, for joining us. We'll go out or go back and hear a little bit more from Mr. Hauser. Okay, this is where we left off, Mr. Hauser.
Yeah, I think we got to about half of this, and I'll kind of start with, I think, the slide that, or the point that I missed, but did you give something for the interview to work with? It's just, did you answer their questions? I think I shared this right before my audio cut off. Answer the questions directly as much as possible. Don't, I think of like politicians these days, if a tough question's answered, politicians are very adept at saying what they want to say versus what the actual question is directed to them. So if an interview asks you a question, try to answer it as directly. There's a reason why they're asking it specifically that way. Was the interview fun? Again, not trying to give students the impression that we only select extroverts versus introverts. That is absolutely, some of the best students, some of the best doctors are introverts by nature. But from a one-on-one setting, was it pleasant? Was it enjoyable? Did the interviewer feel like he or she got the information that they needed? Did you seem to enjoy yourself? Well, as we evaluate as an admissions committee, you may not read this on a catalog or anything, but we're also looking for students that we feel it's a good fit. So we'd rather have 136 students who are excited and looking forward to coming to SCO versus maybe if there's a handful that have great numbers, but again, maybe they're coming across a little more apathetically during the interview day. So again, don't be fake or over the top, but the more enjoyable the experience that you're having and the interviewer is having is always a good, healthy sign that the interview went well. And then what's unique about you, there doesn't have to be something like a wow moment or anything, but again, what may stand out about you or the kind of impression that you're making with the interviewer. You may not have anything sensational that stands out, but if you come across the interview, wow, this applicant was very professional and pleasant, answered my questions, that can be unique or stands out in a positive manner. So that's just another factor to keep in mind. And as far as like after the interview, should you follow up with the interview? You know, absolutely. Again, if it comes natural to send an email or sometimes even a handwritten note to the faculty members, always well received. Remember, these are your future colleagues too. It's not just a teacher, but Dr. Hurd as an optometrist, you know, you are the future of her profession. And then vice versa, when you're finishing optometry school, for most state boards, you need letters of recommendation or reference from optometrists. So what better opportunity is it for your faculty to recommend you to your respective state board, et cetera? And certainly Dr. Hurd and other faculty members, other interviewers are options for that. How to accept, delay, or decline an admissions offer. You know, when you're accepted, depending upon the time of year, we'll give you, like this time of year, you have 8 weeks to decide if you wish to accept a seat. As you get further into the year, that 8 weeks becomes 5 weeks, then 3 weeks, et cetera, as we get closer to filling the class. You have every right to use that full time, especially if you have other interviews, if you, you know, are weighing a couple of options. But you know, once you know definitively, hey, I'm coming to SCO or I'm going to another school. For SCO, accepting the offer will be submitting your tuition deposit, and we now have a form that you would fill out to state your intention. But if you are definitively not coming to SCO, going to another school, letting us know is appreciated, because that means it opens up a spot that we can accept to another student. And then how to follow up on suggestions. Like if the admissions committee says, hey, we want you to retake the OAT, or we want you to get more shadowing, just engage with, most likely it might be Mike Robertson, our admissions director, or whoever wrote you with that, and letting us know, yes, I'm planning on retaking the OAT next month, or I've started contacting other optometrists in the area to try to get some shadowing options, or whatever the suggestion might be. Following up typically by email, or certainly free to call, definitely gives us as the admissions committee the comfort to know that you're on this. So that would be my suggestion there.
Us to the end
Yeah.
of our presentation. Thank you to all of our attendees for taking the time to join us. I know we've covered a lot of information today, but I hope you have found it all beneficial and of assistance as you start your optometric journey. Our next webinar will be Life After Optometry School, featuring members of our Hayes Center for Practice Excellence and alums of SCO, talking about how you go about entering the professional world after you graduate from optometry school. And the information about how to register for that webinar should be available on our website in the next coming days. In the meantime, if you haven't done so already, I invite you to request more information by signing up for our inquiry form. You'll receive a personal advisor and a personal brochure with information relevant to your goals and experiences. Thank you to Mr. Hauser and Dr. Hurd for sharing their time and experiences. And a special thank you to all of the attendees who have joined us. We hope to see you all at the next webinar next month. But in the meantime, have a great rest of your week and take care.